So recently, with the conversation of Wish fresh on the table, many people pointed out a major flaw that Disney animation has right now. The problem with the quirky, adorable Disney characters. Something that has shown up in Wish with Asha as our latest main protagonist, where in my initial review, I mentioned that instead of being her own unique character, she becomes this culmination of these recent Disney quirky characters combined into one to sell the movie as the 100th celebration of this once great company. And this is something that just doesn't really work anymore for Disney storytelling for various obvious reasons, tiring out the audience on these types of tropes that were constantly shoved down as many other videos suggest, instead looking for something new. I mean, this shouldn't be taken as they should stop entirely doing these characters because they have worked in the past, as we would be about to see with these various characters, but more about how they need to expand their storytelling horizons beyond making it formulaic like what Wish has actually shown us. One that just capitalizes off this anniversary for Disney by doing absolutely nothing like those other stories did over that course of time, not really caring about what effort that should be brought forth in these films just to meet certain demands that other investors seek nowadays rather than its audience that loves it to begin with. Like, looking at it now, and again with the animation, none of these characters look distinctly different as they did in the past with Disney did 2D, and some of their own personalities just become more intertwined with each other. They don't seek to change what apparently works best in that regard to appeal to the market of their brands instead of what they were always known for in creating stories that the young and old can actually enjoy. That even sometimes, with characters that we love the most, they still have these certain amounts of traits that don't make any sense for the overall broad story that they are connected with, and just makes it more formulaic and cheap with everything that they should be doing it. We mentioned this because beyond everything else for the most part, they are still a studio and a company that is known to create family films, instead of what other studios do like Universal mainly do for animation being more kids movies like Illumination and some DreamWorks properties like Trolls and Boss Baby recently, but also has recently dived into Disney itself, with Wish actually just feeling like that, being more enjoyed as a kids movie in that regard without any grand theme or purpose to lend itself to. Just carving out the basic supposed essence of what a Disney movie is with the music and the lovable characters with humans and animals interacting with each other, all without any of the broader narrative to actually make it memorable. And because of that, this is why I have to start here at the very present with Asha herself rather than immediately going back to the beginning and working our way up to that point. Where quite frankly, this video is going to be more focusing on Asha herself as the latest Disney protagonist to truly show why these characters actually don't work anymore. Because when you look at her, when you see Wish, you actually notice that she doesn't stand on her own as a character and carries traits over from Rapunzel, Anna, and so forth that started this new breed in the revival era of Disney animation. Like the movie itself, she tries to blend herself back in with that Disney history of what actually worked, of what people actually loved about these characters in the first place. For the majority of the first half of the movie, we get inundated with a barrage of jokes and quirks that we come to expect out of our new modern Disney female heroes to really tie into where she is supposed to go as a character against those who rule, like Magnifico as the villainous figure, something that was also sadly ruined as an amalgamation of both past and modern Disney villains as well. How this figure is more about how we can attempt to connect with the audience, mainly kids in this situation, to make the heroes more relatable in some degree, which should always be expected out of them to that certain point in the realm of awkwardness or whatever young people find funny to actually connect to. It is built up in this certain way to attempt to understand the true struggle of what the film is supposed to do and try to convey, whether it be good or bad depending on your opinion. And the problem with this is how it really doesn't offer anything useful in the background of said characters from before. The story of Wish itself really doesn't dive into any backstory from either its main characters in the hero and the villain, and just seems rushed with no rhyme or reason to why they are there, why the background characters are even there, or even their family exists in that point to understand their motivations behind why they are like this. They hint at it from here and there, but nothing else is actually offered, especially with Asha, with what she specifically shared with her father and what she tried to help with her grandfather and mother at this time, who don't really have anything else to offer in her own purpose in the story. And this is where we have to go back to the very beginning of this trend with Rapunzel herself, because this is a character who was designed this way from the very start, as it seems within the overall story we got compared to Wish. At the time that Disney was still testing the waters of 3D animation, when the previous film was in fact Princess and the Frog, which also had a distinct protagonist itself, with Tiana being a hard worker that wasn't as quirky at all like most are at this point that we will get in a bit later. But the point about Rapunzel here as a character is the fact that she was designed to be like this because of what Mother Gothel did to shelter her in that very tower. She was awkward for a completely valid reason, never getting to experience life, but carrying a very positive attitude going around it, hopeful for that very day, and kind of what personality she was born with, having these magical powers gifted to her. The point that I'm trying to drill in here is that her whole design of her character completely explains and justifies why she is an adorable, quirky female and not just added just because it became popular in the public eye. It's something that contrasts greatly to what other people are like in the film, like Flynn Rider's experiences in the world, and actually opens up both of them to that very relationship we see in the end. More to life than what meets the eye and what serves as a complete story in that very regard, instead of what would soon actually happen after that actually became more annoying. Because if you know me, you would see I have a truly confusing love-hate relationship with Frozen for what it brought to Disney in the modern era. Their most successful franchise that had a decent story, but then became butchered over time with the hollow money-making machine it is today. And in that film, they took the lessons they learned from Tangled with Rapunzel and split it in characters like Anna to contrast with her very sister Elsa, who is more regal and the original intended villain of the film. It took the same element of what Rapunzel experienced for Anna with her sister, with the fact that they were shut out and kept that way throughout until they were actually of age. Like what Frozen did for all of Disney, I find her more responsible for why these characters are roughly the same in those personality types, finding new ways to make her more bubbly and bright to contrast to the rougher edges that Elsa's actually displaying, which actually did work at the time. I did enjoy her for that reason and what she can bring to understand that point, but not to the extent of what they needed to make it in every other property they have now, and why Asha actually suffers as much as she does as her own character. That it's there because it's popular and nothing else, which isn't a bad thing if they know how to make it work again, but just overdone to this point where it doesn't make any sense at all for the others, especially to the point where I also agree happened to both Moana and Mirabel to that same extent, even though I praise those two as one of the best Disney protagonists ever in my opinion. Because despite enjoying them, they do now have what is perceived as the standard Disney formula that makes these movies work the best. Certain moments that are quirky and a little over the top in personality and comedy, even if the background fits something else. And when you realize that, in a way, it kind of feels like a cheap way to make the animation more expressive in this very style, when every character from Rapunzel actually looks kind of the same in that very distinct animation. Once again, forgetting the reason why they designed her specifically in that first place, and like they did with the others, and just feeling like a copy-pasted formula ever since then. Like they do have something they want to say for each character on their own, but the executives instead just see that dollar sign on each films like Frozen and demand everyone just have that same style to create a similar effect to what can work, which unfortunately results in blending it all into itself. The problem that Disney Animation has been having for this past decade, and why Pixar is also suffering in that very regard with what they're doing, unwilling to change from each other other than the fact that Disney has musicals. And that kind of feels disrespectful to their own legacy when we know that they are capable of creating a variety of different stories that are separate and still distinctly connected to each other in that very same way. And yet again, within the final project of Wish, is where Disney just combines all of those four main ones together and passes it off as the next big thing that celebrates the 100 years, forgetting why they actually did it. Because if you notice what I said earlier in this video and what others have said online in the past when they talked about Wish, is how Asha is mainly a quirky character within the first half of the film, having all the typical traits and jokes you would expect, but then later on actually toned down in the later half when they head to defeat the villain, who also suffers from the same two-half problem where he becomes full-blown evil at the very end despite his sympathetic beginning. The whole movie just works in two halves that contradict each other with so many ideas they have from earlier drafts of the film that just did not make the cut for some reason besides the fact of what Disney executives think is best to celebrate their 100th year while forgetting the reason why they're there in the first place. Like, I really don't hate Asha as a character because of what potential that could have been brought, but more about what they did to shove into her character to fit that mode when they actually could have done something different, reducing something that would have made her character very interesting with her story that wasn't there, that just became another reference to other Disney characters instead. Not only just becoming an amalgamation of these adorable quirky Disney protagonists, but also semi-origin to other characters like the fairy godmother if you've seen the end of this movie. Like, it just keeps forgetting the whole point of having her as a character at all if you've already seen those other Disney movies at all, and the reason why people don't like it. Because of the fact it doesn't add anything new or relevant to those individual stories, similar to that of the modern twist villains and the other crap they went through. It just represents something that doesn't work anymore because of how often they abuse it and not learn any lesson from that, or it's just time for a new complete change. Or probably something else, as I've said before, going back to the past to something they've already have. Because for instance, this takes us back to the very beginning of Disney's female heroes with the likes of Snow White to Cinderella, to have talked about and defended a lot with the reason about why they were great on their own and what they offered as a start and growth of Disney's storytelling journey. because the best traits about them is how they stood strong in the face of adversity and abuse and didn't have these bubbly or quirky personalities at all as they grew along. They grew as a character in their own way and took it in a very lovable motherly fashion to other characters like the Seven Dwarfs or the mice in those very films. I mean, yes, again, it's true that they aren't well developed as what we see now, but it is understandable because of that path and what they actually offered in that development that is something vastly different to the state the quirky characters find themselves in, which includes a wide range of characters, where they just had all their own distinct personalities to them in their own way going along a certain path. A similar thing can be said true for other characters like Alice, who was a young girl who found herself into crazy world of Wonderland. Everything was absolutely crazy and she didn't understand, but she still kept this relatively curious personality that I actually love throughout the entire film, that actually contrasts greatly to those of the quirky characters we've seen today, that she doesn't actually have those personalities or quirks to comment on every situation, and the movie just works the way she is because she's actually learning throughout this entire process. That we see over time, they allowed them to grow in various other films to actually produce newer, memorable female protagonists that we all know and love. Just like how we started with Ariel and Belle in the start of the Renaissance with how they have their own individual unique personalities who adapt them and carry the various distinctions as time would go on. How one could actually be more bubbly or more regal in one sense, which still works well for the overall tone of the very story. Every single character they have created before the 2010s just had this distinct connection to their entire story that was being played out, fitting what world they wanted to create and justifies why the audience actually enjoyed it in the first place. I mean, they also had their own awkward moments as well that could be quirky that we all relate to, but they were also able to pick themselves up to develop into something better at the very end. The very journey that inspires us to go along our own certain path with the challenges we face in our life, rather than just being there for the sake of being cute or whatever it takes to sell merchandise down our throats. The moments that are supposed to exist are only existing for a brief few seconds rather than between every single important moment that happens to challenge our characters, like how they say for the most part Mulan actually focuses on her determination to save her people and only cracks up something when the situation is actually presented to itself by others. Her duty to her family and her people are actually more important to the story and why she is one of my favorites for solving such problems despite the difficult odds of those certain situations. But one character I really want to highlight that I relate to the most is actually of course Lilo in this area. Not only just because I am Hawaiian too and I actually grew up there, but also her own background with her family and her daily life, what she actually struggles with and actually being weird with her own personality, which society actually looks down upon for the most part of the movie, which makes her connections to Stitch more special because they understand each other. That ever since her parents' deaths, she has to cope with it in such a way that makes her more eccentric, attaching on to things that others actually don't want, even if they bully her to keep her away every single time, that she still attaches to that certain moment despite not knowing that they actually hate her in this certain way. In this way, with Stitch by her side, we can see that she learns to grow from that and accept what she does have in her own family that makes them complete. How she is actually quirky in this way, but how those certain quirks are more detrimental to those around her, having an actual impact on the story rather than just being there for the sake of it for the character. It's more purposeful to that story to what is being told because of what is being done around it, showing us certain ways it could benefit or damage us, and how it's just not passed off as a certain trait that actually exists because we need to actually express ourselves to be so relatable to the audience, and how it is an option they haven't really considered in recent times to differentiate from them and why they suffer greatly from that part as well, where the next few films after Lilo were just complete duds for those characters until Princess and the Frog actually came back to 2D. Because this comes another character that Disney has actually not explored very much in that way, with ones like Tiana coming from a humble, hardworking beginning, trying to make her dreams come true every single day of her life just for her father. How she's not quirky at all, even when she's turned into a frog, and just actually is more focused and determined every day she gets to live to get to the point that she wants in her very life. And it doesn't actually fully side with her on that part either when she actually learns to live a little like Naveen on that side too, so that she can actually still grow as a person despite being dead set in one way that is more mature than what most modern Disney storytelling has for its heroines. And I think that point is a much better way for newer Disney female protagonists moving forward, ones that actually carry more stern, hardworking traits from here because of the fact they offer something new and different and also have the ability to develop along their path. Just like what has been said mostly intended for Raya being more in this untrustworthy state that made her more jaded about her feelings in the world. I mean, unfortunately, it still carries those annoying quips overall in certain moments in the film, but overall, I still enjoyed her personality that was more distinct than any of those 4 or now 5 Disney females have that are now mentioned in this quirky wave. And I guess with what we have been saying for these characters is that they just need to have their distinct purposes to set themselves apart rather than being the same in those personality. You can have them here and there, but they must serve a greater part and purpose for their very movie rather than what we've come to know now in films like Wish. Because overall with this, and the more I think about it, Wish is a film that completely frustrates me with so many more problems that represents the state that Disney is in now. The story itself on its core ironically reflects what the company is now, that is more of a product that sells the same things over and over again, like these various characters with these stale quirks that we all expect without any respect for the art form at all, and the passion that Disney had in delivering each of them that they needed in order to survive at all. This company wasn't even big or even on the part of the big 5 Hollywood studios until the later end of the 1980s and even at the start of the 2010s with the properties they brought to actually solidify that fact. That this focus to make Disney into a huge media empire for the majority of the 21st century has affected any ability they could have had to tell stories in each single property they own. That somehow they forget about the creative portion of the company that made it successful in the first place today and why they are suffering as a result with these box office failings. And I guess a part of the reason why I wanted to talk about something like this when Disney keeps disappointing me and many others is the simple fact that I know that they can succeed. I know they have people from all backgrounds that can tell these types of stories with the passion and creativity they have and still want to support them to do so even when those above them actually don't. Because if we don't talk about this constantly in that area, then nothing good would actually ever change. Not for any of us fans who love it and still actually want it to succeed to be a part of that legacy one day, no matter what others think. Which still is a future that constantly worries me and one I try to do my best to live up to the past of over 100 years. But then again, I just want to say I really don't hate these characters for what they've been highlighting, but just wish they were actually better designed to be distinct that actually makes sense rather than actually ruining it to the point where they actually don't work anymore, like Marvel and the overall feeling of superhero fatigue. And with that said, let's hope with Wish's critical failures that things can actually change for the better for a newer class of Disney female heroes or just heroes in general. I'm all done now, so goodbye.